Now, Mr. Pryor, thank you so much for doing this. On behalf of Wartime.org, we're pleased as punch that you've decided to do this interview here from sunny Florida.
I think it's a worthy cause.
Thank you very much. Let's jump right into it, shall we? What were your interests as a child? What, sports, flying, music, boating?
Piano playing and math.
Piano playing and math. You were a good math student.
I was good. I wasn't brilliant, but I was good. I mean, I was happy with that. I enjoyed it. I still am.
But you can see the connection between math and music, can't you?
Oh, yes. Oh, definitely.
How do you feel about those who would like to take music education away from people now?
Well, I think it's a mistake. Take it away. You can't take it away. It's part. I'm a great believer that we are relatively close from a major historical point of view to the way we lived when we were most of us lived in caves, right? And in my opinion, a lot of what we like and dislike has its fundamental birth back in that area.
Yes, indeed.
For instance, I believe unfortunately, there will always be nasty people in the world. There will always be a percentage of nasty people. Just like there's a percentage of even domestic animals, where one of them is more wicked than others. And I'm afraid to believe that we can change the nature of the human being in a matter of a few generations is impossible. I'm afraid we have to realize that although a majority of us want peace, there are others who don't want peace. And therefore I personally believe strongly that the best way to avoid another major war is to be prepared to fight it if necessary.
Hear, hear. Can you remember?
If you don't and you think, oh, they will learn to be nice,
well,
I'm afraid it won't happen. I feel it won't happen.
We learned that lesson, didn't we, in the 30s?
Yeah.
Can you remember the build-up to the war, speaking of the 30s?
Yes, I can, and I can say why. My father, who was an Anglophile American and had spent a major part of his youth in England, although he was born in Pittsburgh, he sent me to school in England, and I was at a boarding school, and I remember that most of us at that particular boarding school, which was would discuss the morning newspapers I was a boarder. We had a wonderful housemaster. He would discuss what was going on. Although Churchill was in a minority in the House of Parliament, for most of us, Churchill was our hero long before 1939.
Can you remember the outbreak of the war itself?
I was not there at the outbreak of the war. I had got permission for the first time in 4 years. From my father got permission for me to leave the school before the end of the summer term in order to spend 3 weeks to go back to Argentina, spend some time in Argentina, and then go back. And I was due to get back and arrive late for what they call the Michaelmas term, which is early September. And the reason I don't remember the actual start of the war in Europe, I was still in Argentina. I was due to get on a ship on the 1st of September, a Friday, and my father, and Germany was threatening to invade Poland. My father postponed the trip the day before, so I was in Argentina when on Sunday, the 3rd of September, Great Britain and France declared war against Germany because of the invasion of Poland.
I think this is as good a time as any to discuss how your family came to Argentina. And we talked a little bit about the Argentine contribution to the war. Can we speak a little bit on that?
Certainly. First, your first question, how they came to Argentina.
Yes, how was your country?
My grandfather, who obviously was of Southern English background with the name Pryor, I don't know when he came, when his fathers or grandfathers, well, I know that I know that his father was born in eastern Ohio. And my father was born in Pittsburgh, and they were originally farmers. I have a feeling that way back they went and became farmers in the northeastern states, because Ohio, when it was opened up, was not inhabited directly by Europeans. It is inhabited by the overflow of farmers from northeast United States. So that's the origin of my father's family having come
And
originally from England.
Originally from England. And thence to Argentina?
Then to Argentina. And then my father, I think when he was, he eventually joined Swift and Company, which was a large meat packing plant, meat packing company, headquartered in Chicago, and there was a Swift family, and they employed him first in Chicago. Then they wanted to open an office in England. Believe it or not, they had plans to be able to ship cattle on the hoof from the United States to Great Britain.
Good God.
So my father, aged 11, he turned out to be an only child, was in Liverpool, England, from the age of 11 to the age of 21. He did 2 years of college. My guess is that the British farmers didn't like the idea of importing competition with live cattle on the hoof, cheaper beef from the United States. So those 10 years for my grandfather were not a big success, I suspect. So then Swift and Company wanted to open up a meat packing plant in Argentina. And the attraction of Argentina was that you could kill cattle, chill the beef, not freeze it, chill the beef, and as long as it reached somebody's plate within less than 48 or 50 days, that tasted much better than frozen beef. And so the Argentine suddenly became famous for raising cattle that could be chilled, and that took away the opportunity for Australian beef, which had to be frozen because of distance.
That's right.
And that's why they ended up in a... So my grandfather was the first one, together with a British company, competitors, the first meat packing plants in Argentina in the early 1900s.
So they were in time for World War I and all that tinned beef that came from Argentina.
World War I.
I see. Well, he certainly contributed to the Allied victory in the First World War if he was in Argentina tinning beef.
Yes.
Can you recall, let's jump back to 1939. You mentioned that you were going to be on a ship on the 3rd of September. Perhaps you said the 1st of September.
1939.
Yes, 1939. Do you remember having heard about the Battle of Britain, and how was it received? Were you in Argentina during the Battle of Britain that summer of 1940?
Yes, I was. As a result, there were four brothers. The oldest had been married, who was 10 years older than I. I had three older brothers, 10, 7.5 years, and 5 years older than I. The oldest was married. The second had studied journalism at the University of London, gone back to Argentina. He was about to move to the States because he felt he had more opportunity in journalism in the States than he did. We all had two passports, American and Argentine, perfectly legal. And the brother next to me, who was born in 1918, together with 15 others, in 1940, before Pearl Harbor, but after the invasion of Germany into Norway, decided to join volunteer for the Royal Canadian Air Force. So he and 15 others went off to Canada and joined the Royal Canadian Air Force. One of the other 15 survived the war. Only 4 survived of those 16, the whole war. One of them became head of the Royal Canadian Air Force after the war.
Good God.
So he became Canadian.
And you had other siblings in the war effort, didn't you?
So, number one was employed by the British Ministry of Food to organize food shipments from the Eastern Atlantic countries of Latin America, principally Brazil and Argentina, to ship food and grain to Britain. That was his job. Number two had come to the States, and he eventually joined the US Navy after Pearl Harbor and became an officer of the US Navy in intelligence. He never served aboard a ship. And number three, the one closest to me, 5 years older than I, went to Canada, and he was the one who, with these 15 others, eventually joined the RAF.
Whom you just mentioned.
And then he was killed early December 1941, flying out of Malta. Not defending Malta, he was attacking Axis shipping, crossing north to south from the tip of Italy to the Axis forces in North Africa.
Had he been there for much of the siege of Malta? For much
He
of
must have,
yes.
but he never wrote about it.
Ah.
He must have. It so happened that, well, now I have to fast forward, that I ended up for a little while in Malta. The ship I eventually joined. Well, why did I join the Royal Navy?
Well, that was my next question. We may as well go right into that.
Okay.
What was the impetus?
Okay. I had finished my high school, I finished my high school in the Southern Hemisphere. The high school was from March to December, not September to June. Southern Hemisphere.
That's right.
And just after I finished high school, I learned that my brother had been missing, believed killed.
Sorry.
So I decided I'm off to the war. I went just so that this was, my brother was killed just before Pearl Harbor, a matter of a week or two, and soon after that I graduated, and I went to the American embassy, or the American consulate I think, said I want to join the US Navy. They said you don't have to, you're an American, but since you live abroad you are not drafted. That's still the case today. If you, for some crazy reason. As you know, during Vietnam, 200,000 or 300,000 Americans went to Canada to avoid the draft.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
Okay. The Americans said, I said, can't you send me to the States? Pay them the passage. I didn't have any money. And they said, no, if you want to go, buy yourself a passage, and you'll automatically be drafted when you come in. So I went to the British. The British by then were allies with the Americans.
That's good.
And the British were obviously so desperate that they took this Argentine-born American, accepted me, I had a medical, and sent me to England to join the British Navy as an ordinary seaman.
Well, that's
by the way, our ship took 7 weeks from the time they left to the time they arrived. It had to zigzag across the Atlantic because the South Atlantic didn't have enough Allied shipping to warrant convoys. We ended up in Lagos, Nigeria, and there we waited for a convoy, and we joined the convoy, some 50-odd ships, which then went slowly from Lagos, Nigeria, to England.
All right. So you were saying, Louis, that because of the Battle of the Atlantic, and of course you were in the Southern Atlantic, emanating from Argentina, you had to zigzag your way to arrive at Lagos.
arrive at Lagos.
Yes.
And then we waited a week there and joined the convoy. So the whole thing took 7 weeks. And when we arrived in England, everybody who had a British passport could leave the ship. I didn't have a British passport, so I was locked in my cabin for 5 or 6 hours and was interviewed to make sure that I wasn't a potential enemy spy, because I was not British.
My God, what rotten luck.
I had an American passport and I had an Argentine passport. But I was eventually accepted by the Royal Navy, and after basic training where everybody went for basic training, it was, I don't know, 4 or 5 months. The interesting thing was, in that basic training camp, they
Where was it? Let's move on into your training.
in a place called Collingwood. No, it is called HMS Collingwood, I'm sorry. It was somewhere just north of Portsmouth. I've forgotten exactly where. It was just north of Portsmouth. Now, we were all interviewed, and those of us who had a high school degree were sort of considered perhaps eventually potential to become an officer. Eventually. I was assigned, when I finished my training as an ordinary seaman, I was assigned to a ship that was a 1916 launched light cruiser called Hms Dauntless, of the D class of British light cruisers, and it did coastal convoy. It wasn't big enough or strong enough to be part of an active fleet, but it was good enough to defend against enemy submarines in the coastal convoys. And during that time, it was interesting that there were about 14 or 15 of us, of the crew of 300, 14 or 15 of us, that obviously were being watched more by the officers and the others, because we'd finished our high school degree. We had a high school degree.
I see.
And the interesting thing was, we weren't given special duties, we were given difficult duties. We had a much worse time than if we didn't have a high school degree. They were testing us.
They were testing you.
For instance,
For officer material.
such crazy things as washing down the decks in the middle of winter. Washing down the decks in the middle of winter with seawater. Frequently, they would run out of sufficient boots for those of us who were to wear, so we had to go barefoot. They were testing us. Would we break under added
stressors?
Under stress? It was a very good way of turning out. And then at the end of that, of about 5 or 6 months, we had to go before a board. This happened when we were in harbour. A board of 6 officers, 4 from our ship, and one an admiral from somewhere, and a captain of another ship, and they interviewed those of us who were potential officers as to whether we were good enough to go, and for them to waste time to send us to officers training school.
Before then, you were trained as an able-bodied seaman, but under a bit of duress because they were planning on pushing you toward.
Not treated as an able-bodied seaman, which is equivalent to a lance corporal. I was still an ordinary private. I was an ordinary seaman.
I see.
Okay. Now, so I think there were 12 of us, and in alphabetical order, we all had to wait outside and be interviewed by this board. I was with the letter P for Pryor. I was the 11th out of 12. The other 10 went in individually, would be questioned for 10 or 15 minutes, would come out, and within 5 minutes they'd be called back in and told, you've passed or you haven't passed. You are going to go off to the officer training, or you're not.
Very stressful.
In my case, I was questioned for a long time about Argentina, the convoy and all that, and eventually I went out and I waited, and I waited, and I waited 50 minutes before being called back in. This other guy, number 12, was still waiting to be interviewed. I was called back in and I was told, you passed. A year later, I met one of the officers on the board and said, what the devil happened? Why was it? Well, you were considered, the Admiral considered you a Dago, and said, how the heck can we have an officer of the Royal Navy who's a Dago? But apparently, he said, the rest of us thought you were fine, you were terrific. So eventually, we prevailed over the Admiral, and you were accepted.
That's just one of the best stories I've heard. Can you remember any?
Now the interesting thing,
So, but I just wanted, just parenthetically, from thence you went into officer training, yes?
From Hms Dauntless, I went into officer training, and the name of the wartime officer training was Hms King Alfred.
Really, the King Alfred. Well,
the HMS King Alfred.
The founder of the Royal Navy.
It was in and around 3 different places around Brighton, including Lancing College, actually.
And what was it? Was it also a cruiser? Was it a destroyer?
No, it was extremely well done. A much better training than my friends who were in the army. For instance, I think in our group there was something like 55 or 60 of us. 2 were old Etonians from Eton College. Very smart, they passed all the exams, but they had a strange, slightly superior attitude. When the final day came, they were sent back to the lower deck and the rest of us were accepted.
Good God. Do you remember any of your instructors? Any particular?
No, I don't remember any of those instructors. No, I do not.
In any point in your training, were there any instructors that stood out as particularly inspiring or influential?
Later on, because as a result of that, I became what the US Navy would call a deck officer, and what the British Navy would call a executive branch officer. They are the only ones who can be commander of a ship. They can only be. They're the only ones who can be a admiral of a fleet.
Good God.
With those who are, at least in the British Navy, executive branch officers. So I became an executive branch officer. For some reason, I have no idea why I was made part of the honor guard. Only one officer from my ship, and one officer from 2 other ships. I think 3 officers were part. Now, there was also part of the honor guard was the Air Force, and part of the honor guard was the Army.
Yes.
But we were I was one of 3 or 4 officers in the Navy. Okay. If you can imagine, because this is important, got a 4-lane highway. On one side of the highway is this beautiful building with balustrade and big steps up to the center. On the other side, a park. We were in the park, on the edge of the park, and as we were waiting there, a bus or 2 turned up, and out came about 40 or 50 white clothes and shorts, very thin. They were the walking survivors of Changi prison.
After the Singapore campaign.
Right. And they were given special seats on either side of this entrance to the big building. So we saw them being seated and we realized who they were. All right? But they were there, obviously being given a position of privilege to watch the ceremony of surrender by their captors, the Japanese. And they had been very badly treated. We were told that Mountbatten would come up in a car, driving on the left-hand side, we would park, and the car would stop, and as the chauffeur opened his door, we were supposed to say, "Present arms!" to the Commander-in-Chief. He steps out of the car and purposely turns his back on us. We say, "Present arms!" He's paying no attention to us at all. He talks to the driver and tells the driver to move on. He looks across at the building, takes 2 or 3 steps into the avenue, and salutes the recently released prisoners of war. He then turns around and salutes us. Can you imagine that?
That's in keeping in who he was as a man.
This is true.
Honor.
Sure, it's thought out, but it shows he paid respect to those who most deserved it.
Now you mentioned that you felt marginalized somehow, being Argentine.
No, being different. I was not the man out, and so I was then told that the Navy wanted me to become permanent Navy.
Ah.
Right? But I had found out that those of us who came from foreign countries who were in the army would get preference for early demobilization.
Ah.
So I decided I wanted to go back, but I was tempted to have a permanent career in the Royal Navy. But I'd have obviously had to become a British citizen, I would imagine.
Of course. Tell us about after the war. What happened after the war? Tell us.
After the war, I go back to Argentina, and guess the last day I was paid, and then our ship gets back to Britain, and there I have another story. We arrive in Belfast. We're the first ship coming back from the Far East after the end of the war against Japan in Belfast. So we decided on the way home to pick up a whole bunch of bananas somewhere because we knew that bananas were non-existent during the war.
It wasn't until 1950.
So we announced ahead of time that we were willing to give a party for the children of Belfast, up to 500 apply when we got there.
How beautiful.
So we had 500 children come the day or two after we arrived there. The problem was, half of them got sick on bananas. But there's still another story to tell about Belfast. The mayor of Belfast was so grateful for us, despite the fact that half his children got sick, that he decided to throw a ball for us, for the officers, right?
Yes.
In the Guildhall or whatever it was.
Yes.
So we turned up and we're told by our senior officers now there are going to be a whole lot of Irish girls, Northern Irish girls there. You guys, and there are going to be many more girls than you. You are not allowed to have more than 3 dances in a row with the same girl. You have to change. You have to change. Okay? So we turn up, and sure enough, they're all sitting down there, these girls, and eventually the music starts. There's a marine band and so on, and there's food still around. And I zero in on what I think is a very pretty girl, and I dance with her 3 times. Then I dance with somebody else. Then I go back and try to find her, and I manage. So I probably had 30% of my dances with her, I thought. Now, in those days, unlike today, believe it or not, even if you had a girlfriend, you did not sleep around.
Oh, sure.
Okay, with all due respect. But I wanted a kiss. I hadn't kissed a girl in a long time. So I asked her, where did she live and how was she going to get home? She was going to take a late night bus. And I said, if I order a taxi, I was wanting the good night kiss, you see. If I ordered a taxi, could I take you home? Oh, that would be fine, she said. So the end of the evening comes the dance, and I arranged to meet her downstairs. I order a taxi, the taxi's waiting, I meet her. two turned up, identical twins. I had been dancing with identical twins, so I had to take them home, and I obviously could not kiss them both, so I didn't get my goodnight kiss.
Well, they should have at least given you both a kiss. You know?
I didn't demand it, and I didn't get it.
So
That's the end of my experience.
That's the end of it. We should all be so lucky. You've had a magnificent career as a chemist. Yes? Did I get that right?
I'm not a chemist,
No.
but I was doing chemical. I didn't know one end of a chemical formula.
But you worked for DuPont.
I knew people. I knew. The Navy taught me how to handle people and how to get a team together.
That's what I was going to ask you. How did that contribute to your success, the Royal Navy?
Tremendously, tremendously. I go back to Argentina and I join a subsidiary, an Argentine subsidiary of DuPont there, as an assistant to a technical salesman. And then I moved to something else, and then I moved. DuPont was very good in identifying potential leaders. I was then moved to the finance department.
Huh.
I then eventually end up in my career, I was eventually sent to the Home Office in Wilmington, Delaware, as assistant director of the whole of Latin America. This was 10, 15 years later, having gone up, doing different things, different times. And DuPont believed that above a certain level, what was required was leadership rather than technical knowledge. And the one thing that I give as an example of that, I would be an assistant director of Latin America, which opened my eyes up to different parts of Latin America that I had no idea how much they differed from Argentina.
Oh, yes, indeed. Yes.
Argentina is basically a European country that happened to be in South America.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
That's not very different from most of the other countries where you get a much heavier smattering of the original Indians
Yes.
or mixed blood.
Yes.
Okay.
Tell us about-
I was suddenly told, you are being transferred to the technical department. Technical department had 5,000 people, of whom 2,000 were PhDs. Technical department, I said, I'm not technical. You're being a new job. You should be very proud. What is the job? You will be called Director of Econometrics. Oh, I said, sounds great, terrific, thank you. I go home and I look up the word econometrics because I didn't know what the heck it meant. and then I became director. Econometrics is the deep analysis of a country's economy into its different parts. Right?
And this is direct leadership
And
that
I had 40 or 50 PhDs on me. As a result of that experience and an earlier experience in Argentina with technical people in applied research, this is not supposed to be a criticism of PhDs, but the cleverer and the deeper a PhD is, the less likely he or she is to be a natural team player.
I see.
They're individual. And so my biggest challenges as a leader were in both places in charge of a whole bunch of PhDs.
You
Get
had
them to work together.
to get them to work, and that you learned directly from the Royal Navy.
Yeah, absolutely. No question.
Tell us about your children and your grandchildren.
My children and grandchildren. I married the girl I left behind.
Really?
If she had not existed, I probably would not have. I would have ended up in the Navy full time. I married a girl I left behind and waited for me. A lovely mother, I must say. We had three children, boy, girl. They're all still alive. Currently live in Argentina, Switzerland. And and eventually, after 19 years of marriage, I wanted out, not because of somebody else. I wanted out because I was transferred from Argentina to the parent company, and I was on my own for 4 months because of schooling. My wife and children did not follow me immediately. So the oldest one was already about to go to college in Haverford College.
Yes.
And I was much happier on my own, and I decided I wanted a divorce from a selfish point of view.
Well, we all learn our
So
lessons.
I have 3 children, and I have biological. Joanna is my third wife. I divorced. I married somebody who died 10 years later, a very happily married. She died 10 years later.
Sorry.
She had two sons, my stepsons. One has died, unfortunately.
I'm sorry.
So, and then I was lucky enough to meet Joanna. So, I've had, am I ashamed of anything I did? Yes, perhaps. I did not.
That's all of us.
I believe marriage is for life if possible, but I am a happier individual, selfishly happier individual, having done what I did, because I've been very happily married since.
You also seem like come across as a very genuine and honest person. Let's recap a second. You were a young man whose family had immigrated to Argentina. You were more than 8,000 miles away from the theater of war, but yet yourself and your brothers volunteered from Argentina to defend principles of democracy and to stand up against Nazi tyranny.
Yes, it is a very justified war.
And you felt that you needed to jump on a ship, as did your brothers, and to do what you felt was morally correct. You then passed officer corps. You passed your officer corps training. You became a deck officer. You were present at Operation Andal in south of France. You were active for more than a year in the Far East. You put yourself at great risk. Would you have done all of that I've stated? Would you have done it all over again had you the chance?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There was very little bad. Everything I think helped me be the person I am.
Y hablas español, por supuesto.
Sí, cómo no. Pero desgraciadamente los argentinos somos los peores en hablar español. Y decimos calle y valle en vez de calle y valle. Y decimos vos cómo te sentís instead of tú cómo te sientes.
It's such a pleasure to meet you, sir. Thank you very much for this. On behalf of Wargen and on behalf of untold millions, as Churchill said, who have yet to see this interview, it is an honor, not a privilege. It's an honor to meet you.
You mentioned Churchill. Churchill was always my hero.
Yes.
And I think Andrew Roberts has done a terrific job.
You said you had an anecdote of General Slim.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Oh, anecdote of General Slim, yes.
What was that?
I saw General Slim, far away as you, as part of the honor guard after the surrender ceremony. He may have come around and inspected the guard, I don't know what, but I'm very close to him. I have photographs of him very close. Okay. Fast forward. I married. After 19 years, I divorced. I married again, and that person, after 10 years, died at age 49. And by then, she was British. We had decided that eventually, after working in the States or wherever in the world for DuPont, we would probably retire to England. So we bought a little house in Bath, England. And the person from whom we bought the bath was somebody called Hms, by coincidence, Pryor, also spelled with a Y. The only other Pryor in the telephone book, spelled Pryor. After my wife Nora died, I took her back to England to die because I used you terminally ill. Within a week, she invited me to dinner, this person in Bath, and introduced me to somebody called Aileen Slim. And she gave me a long lecture. Mr Pryor did, of that I had to be that I was going to become a very eligible widower bachelor. Right? But I should be very careful of women. Don't go on the rebound. Be very careful. You'll probably remarry, but you've got to be very careful. I was introduced to Alien Slim, and Alien Slim found I came from Argentina, and she said, "Before you go back, I'd like to give you a dinner." Right? Her husband had died. This is Field Marshal Slim, ex-governor general of Australia, had died 2 years before. She invited me to dinner about a week before I was due to go back to Argentina. And typically British, when you normally have a fairly formal dinner, when you after the pudding or dessert or sweet
course
serving, the women are asked to leave and the men light their cigarettes. She said to the gathering of 12 people there, she said, "I'm going to do it differently, and I want to have a long chat with Louis. I'm leaving you, gentlemen, light your cigarettes. Ladies, would you please stay here? I want to take and have a chat off with Louis." So she took me off to her husband's study.
To General Slim's study.
Field Marshal.
Field Marshal, forgive me. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Desk. She sat beside the desk. She did not sit behind the desk. And I sat in front of the desk. And she gave me a similar long lecture about how eligible I was going to be. She did not realize that I'd been told to still given the same warning by her friend, Mr Pryor. And above the desk, as I'm looking, I see the Japanese sword that he had received, Singapore.
And you remember having been there.
So I thanked her so much for the end, and before I got up I said, "By the way, I saw your husband receive that sword." She said, "What?" That was in Singapore. She said, "I was there." "Why were you there?" I told her. "Oh," she said, "tell me about it." He never talked about it openly. "Tell me about it." She may have been being polite, but I had to go through the whole story of that day with her, right? And what Mountbatten did. She either pretended she did not know, or she did not know. Her husband had been frequently, army people who have seen bad things don't like talking about it, even to their family later.
Yes, of course.
They try to wrap it up.
I want to thank you for telling us.
That's my story.
This
about her.
this has been absolute gold. My spending this morning, this afternoon
Well,
with
I'm
you.
glad you think so.
Truly, you don't know what you've done.
But you don't know how lucky I've been.
How so?
You don't know how lucky. I've been a very lucky guy in my life.
Yes, you have.
And the one thing I'm not proud of is having divorced, but in most everything else, things have happened to me. I've been so lucky.
Well, Sub-Lieutenant Pryor, thank you very much for this time. It seems like you've had a good war and a better life afterwards. Cheers.
I enjoyed talking to you. And by the way,
Yes.
lots of success to your venture, and I hope
Thank you.
you see it, because I'm interested in more generations, younger generations realizing it. I'm very disappointed, quite frankly, in particular British people who are ashamed of the British Empire. They shouldn't be ashamed of the British Empire, in my opinion.
What would you like to tell young people today?
What?
What would you like to tell young people today?
Look at the different parts of the British Empire and tell me how many of them would be where they are today if it hadn't been for the British. And if you want to make a comparison, with all due respect for that small country, look at the Belgian colonies, or what were the Belgian colonies, and compare the two. India wouldn't be India. Kenya could be better, could be Kenya. Nigeria could be better, but they are countries. And that's thanks to the British and training eventually.
Mr. Pryor, thank you so much for meeting me again today.
I'm delighted to meet you. It's fun.
Here we are. We've got a luncheon date set up, and we're going to be discussing. We've already got covered your training and those wonderful stories of the surrender, which is going to now be into posterity, and people are going to be able to study what your observations were, and in fact your participation in the surrender of the Japanese Southeast Asian force. But
yes, and I'd like to talk a little bit about the naval training of officers, of wartime officers.
Shall we start with that then? Yes.
Yes, I'd like to start there. First of all, why was I chosen? Basically, I was chosen because I happened to be good at mental math, and mental math was terribly important. And also, I didn't have to wear glasses.
Oh.
That was considered important to become a naval officer.
Why is that?
Not to have to wear glasses. And furthermore, as a potential candidate to become an officer, how quickly your eyes moved from a bright light to a dark light. If you didn't move within 1/2 hour, you were probably not considered a good officer, because it meant that you wouldn't have good eyesight on a dark night.
Richard, how did they gauge that? How was that gauged?
Purely gauged by testing.
Ah.
Testing. I remember being tested for instance, put it in a small room, completely dark, said, look at that screen, and starting now, tell me what you see when you see it. Now, I happen to know from previous people that if you didn't see anything within half an hour, you weren't going to be considered as potential as an officer.
Ah.
Right? And fortunately, after 26 minutes, I was able to discern shapes. It took 26 minutes to go from a normal light to a dark light and be able to discern certain shapes. So after 26 minutes, I was able to say on it, and that was one of the things. The other thing was a 45-minute test in mental math. And based just on those 2 or 3 things meant that you were potential officer material. This is while you were still an ordinary seaman. You then had to be sent to sea as an ordinary seaman, but you were already marked as potential. And so when you went to sea as an ordinary seaman, the officers were told, watch these guys, watch them especially, because they might be candidates to go to the officers' training. And we were given the worst jobs among the rest of the seamen. They were testing us, testing our resolve.
The foreplan and the long-term investment of the Royal Navy and its personnel is something to be marveled
Oh,
at.
absolutely. And furthermore, if we have time later, I'd like to be able to say, once we went to the officers' training school, what they taught us, how to be an ideal naval officer, completely different from how to be an ideal army officer.
How's that?
Well, I'd rather read out what it says. Read out what it said.
We'll do it.
Basically, your responsibility for the people under you. You've got to train them. You've got to help them. You've got to motivate them, right? And how you motivate people, and how you train them, and how you form a team from very early on. If you didn't have the ability to form a team and people to respect you, not love you, respect you. So you had to
Because you'd rather be respected than loved by your men.
Oh, terribly important. Respect comes first. Love is the wrong attitude. Respect even better than like.
That's
Terribly important.
fascinating.
Think about it.
See, yes, because I come from a generation that wants to be loved, right? We want to be loved and complimented by everybody. I think that's the biggest vice of my generation. Yes.
Or is it natural anyhow? No, it has changed.
It has changed, hasn't
It
it?
has changed, yeah.
Tell me a little bit about, let's continue discussing the camaraderie. You just mentioned that you would rather be respected than even liked. So can you tell me a little bit about the camaraderie on board the ship?
Two things, camaraderie between the ranks first.
Yes.
Furthermore, I had an older brother who was in the US Navy. He was never on board ship. He was in intelligence. But I met a whole bunch of other US naval officers, and the difference was the camaraderie between the ranks. For instance, when you were on you had 4-hour shifts, and you were on the midnight shift on the bridge, middle of the ocean, ship going, nothing on the ocean. You were there. The ship in a way was under your command. Now within 20 yards of you was the captain. If you saw anything that you didn't like, you would immediately make the captain. But you were the only officer. You were with a petty officer and 2 or 3 ordinary or able seamen. 5 of you. What are you going to do during 4 hours? You see nothing, do nothing, but you have to observe. You have to observe. And so you talk, and you talk to each other as equals. Even though one's a commissioned officer, the other's a non-commissioned officer, the other are ordinary ranks from completely different backgrounds. You talk to each other as equals.
Well, you told me that the difference between the American Navy and the Royal Navy, of course, is that the American Navy tends to,
surprisingly, more structured,
yes,
and more rigid.
Than the Royal
Two things.
Navy, yeah.
The two things. One was between ranks, even though you were on duty.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you met those ranks on shore, they were supposed to salute you as an officer.
Yes.
Right? But while you were on watch for 4 hours, you were basically 4 individuals or 5 individuals, all equal. Right? That was important to make the average person feel equal, that he was important.
Well, in fact,
the ordinary seaman.
In fact, each person wasn't it?
Now, the other difference was in the wardroom. The wardroom is the officers' dining room and bar and relaxation room.
Yeah.
One was, and I think this was due to the fact that the Royal Navy was what they called wet. They accepted alcohol.
That's right.
The US Navy, never any alcohol on board ship.
Well, officially.
And by the way, as a result, US Navy personnel, when they got to harbor, got far more drunk.
And got into fights and had more trouble.
Fights and so on than their equivalent in the Royal Navy. But back in the wardroom, normally lunch was served from 11:30 to 1 o'clock. Why 11:30? Because the noon watch started at 12. So anybody who was on the noon watch had to have lunch a little early. Now, in the wardroom, you had everybody except the captain. The captain did not belong to the wardroom. The captain had his cabin. He was not a member of the wardroom. He had to be invited to the wardroom. So the number 1 officer under the captain was the number 1 officer. If he was there early, and I, the junior officer, turned up, and he was sitting somewhere having his lunch, I automatically would go up to him and say, "Good morning, sir. May I sit beside you?" He said, "Of course. Sit beside me. Sit beside me, Louis." If he knew my name.
Good Lord.
Right? And we'd be 2 equals talking to each other, even though the ranks, I had 1 or 1.5 stripes, and he had 3. Wait, like a colonel versus a junior second lieutenant.
I don't think that would happen in the American Navy.
What?
I don't think that would happen in the
In
American
the
Navy.
American Navy, everybody had their pre-assigned seats.
That's right.
Right.
And never ever speak to the captain. That I know.
So therefore, for instance, if I had an immediate boss who was 1 or 2 ranks higher than me, it is not unusual for at 11 o'clock him seeing me doing something wrong, say, Pryor, he wouldn't remonstrate with me in front of others.
He'd take you aside. He'd take you aside.
That was a mistake, Pryor. Don't do that again ever, please. Okay? For this reason, that reason, that reason. This was at 11:15. At 12:05, we'd probably be on a first name basis having a drink together.
Isn't that amazing? Can we talk a little
big difference between on duty and off duty. American Navy, very little difference between on duty and off duty.
Well,
relationship.
I think that distinction that you made is so important because culturally I believe that Americans like to put at the front that we're egalitarian, but in fact we're not. We're not. And I find that, this is just myself, I find that British society is in its very DNA egalitarian.
Now, I don't know that you can say that because the difference between my fellow Argentines who came from Argentina when I went into the army,
Yes.
that was very rank conscious.
Wasn't it?
Much more pre-assigned seats in the officers' mess.
Let's go into the first time that you saw action, may we?
What?
May we progress to the first time that you saw action? Can you describe what, where that was? I believe it was during you were first ETO, were you not, in the Mediterranean during was it the Salerno landings or was it the
No.
Anzio?
D-Day was early June 1944.
No, I beg your pardon. I'm referring to the Mediterranean. Where was?
So am I.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Yes.
D-Day was in northern France.
Yes, of course.
Now, that was followed up by another invasion.
Oh, yes.
6 weeks later in the south of France.
That's right. The Operation Mongoose.
The full come under the soft underbelly.
That's right. Yes.
Actually, historically, it's probably been proven as a waste of time.
Yes, no doubt. This was.
But I was involved in this. Nothing happened that day. We had planes flying in the air in case the Germans came. The Germans never came.
Right. To be clear, it'd been weeks since we had spoken, and I knew that you were engaged in the Mediterranean, but I thought it was the Anzio landing. But in fact, it was Operation Anvil, the invasion of southern France.
Then also we were acting as air coverage during some of the landings in South Italy.
Let's talk about first of all the first time that you went into action, which you were beginning to explain before I interrupted, which was the invasion of southern France. May we speak about that?
Not even speak about it. It was a non-event.
It was a non-event.
The landing craft came and the landing craft landed, and there was virtually no opposition whatsoever.
No Luftwaffe to speak of.
No.
Is it true that
that was part of Vichy France?
That's right. Yes.
The bottom half of France.
Yes. And people refer to that campaign as the Champagne Campaign, as it were.
I think you're right. Correct.
Because when they landed, I think that you had French waiters come up with champagne bottles saying, "Where have you been, monsieur?"
Could be. But in Italy, it is different because there, the Germans realized how important it was that Italy remain in the Axis.
Yes, indeed. And then from there you shipped off and provided...
From there we were shipped off through the Suez Canal.
Yes.
To the East Indies Fleet. And essentially what is little known is that the fight against Japan was under 2 different commands. 80% of the action was in the Pacific, east of Singapore, and on the eastern side of the Southeast Asia Peninsula, of Malaysia and Burma, and down to Thailand,
To the Siam Peninsula.
in Singapore.
Yes.
East of that was under MacArthur.
Yes.
But a separate command, who did not report to MacArthur, was the East Indies or Southeast Asia Command
Under
under
Mountbatten. That's right.
this was to ensure the recovery of Burma and find a way into China to help the Chinese defend against the Japanese through Burma.
They also knew what was coming after the Japanese defeat, which was the Chinese Civil War against Mao. And it was very important to have Western powers there
Well,
too.
I'm not sure. I guess the powers knew that. We didn't know that. We
Of
didn't
course.
know that. But it was important to have the right-wing Mao group
That's right.
rather than. This was before it was realized that particularly Russia and Chinese communists would take advantage of the vacuum created by the Allies winning the war.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Okay,
Which led straight to Korea. It all kind of links in, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about the day-to-day conditions on board ship?
From many points of view, I guess you would say boredom. To avoid boredom, when the ship was at sea, waiting for the next invasion, because our aircraft carrier had two purposes. One is to protect our ship together with up to 4 or 5 other small aircraft carriers to protect big ships against enemy air attack. Right?
Right.
So if there was enemy air attack, we would have planes in the air prepared to protect. So we were protecting them. The other thing was to soften the landing areas with small bombs whenever we invaded enemy territory, jumping ahead rather than fighting the way south through Burma, jumping and then cutting off the Japanese, if we were successful with the landing, cutting off the Japanese that were caught behind us. You understand me?
Perfectly. Let's talk a little bit about some of those operations. Yeah.
Those were the two things. We were called escort carriers in the first case, and assault carriers, during an invasion assault, providing air cover, not only air cover, but also softening up the beaches, making the enemy hide in their bunkers and not be ready to murder all the people landing.
Yes, essentially offering cover to the landing forces. Let's talk a little bit about the operations on the operational level. Did you provide air cover in any instance? Talk a little bit about your action in Southeast Asia. I think we've just kind of
the main event was our carrier, together with 2 or 3 others and 5 destroyers, was involved in the last, according to the historians, the military historians, the last surface naval action of the Second World War. It happened after VE Day. It happened in late May 1945. VE Day was early May 1945.
Yes, indeed.
Had nothing to do with victory in Europe.
Nothing at all.
In fact, we were a bit annoyed at how many people in Britain thought that was the end of the war.
Yeah,
We
right.
reckoned the war would go on for another 2 years, which, thanks to the atom bomb, it didn't. But
So
during that time, the Japanese Navy had been essentially weakened to the extent that it just had a few ships in the Indian Ocean still. And the biggest ship was a heavy Japanese cruiser called the Haguro,
The Haguro.
H-A-G-U-R-O.
That's it.
And the Japanese also had occupied a few of the islands off Burma, and to continue to supply the troops on that, they had to give them supplies. And one of the aircraft of our fellowships found that the Haguro had left harbour from Singapore and or Penang, which is on the western side of Malaysia, in order to take supplies to. So it was decided to try to cut off and sink that ship. It had the Haguro and a protective destroyer.
What was the name of your ship, the aircraft carrier, for some reason?
My aircraft,
Yes,
HMS Hunter.
the Hunter, that's right.
Hunter was the name of two ships in the Second World War. Initially, a destroyer that was sunk off Norway,
That's right.
and then given to this relatively small aircraft carrier that carried 25 planes.
I remember reading about it on Wikipedia when you told me the name of the ship. There was a question about on Twitter.
Anyhow,
But to address that, there was a question on Twitter from a Royal Navy ensign who contacted me and said, "Do you mean was he on the Hunter off Norway?" And I said, "No, he was on the Hunter, the aircraft carrier."
yeah.
And he knew immediately what.
And by the way, in the British Navy, this is the difference between the US Navy and small difference. In the British Navy, you're in a ship if you're part of the crew. In the US Navy, you're on a ship if you're part of the crew.
Look at that.
Okay, so what happened that day? It was decided the admiral, who probably didn't think far enough ahead, probably, he decided to send to the best way to tackle this
The Haguro?
this Haguro and his accompanying destroyer was a nighttime track and destroyer. So he sent our 5 destroyers full speed ahead, eastward, to try to cut it off and attack it at night.
Exciting.
Because we knew that our radar was better than that of the Japanese.
Ah.
So an attack at night had the advantage. Because the disadvantage of destroyers attacking a cruiser is that the cruiser has bigger guns, much longer range, and as a result, shells from the cruiser could be lobbed at the destroyers at a much greater distance before the destroyers could shoot smaller shells at the cruiser, or let alone torpedoes.
Was there...
So
Yes.
it was a nighttime attack.
Nighttime attack.
It was successful. The Japanese cruiser was sunk. But, however, whether this was anticipated or not, I suspect it probably wasn't in the height of battle. It was suddenly realized that the destroyers did not have enough fuel. They were destroyers designed for the Atlantic battles, which are relatively short distance battles,
Mm-hmm.
versus the American destroyers that had much greater fuel capacity. So there was no way that the 5 destroyers who survived, one was slightly damaged, I believe, could come back. They didn't have enough fuel to get back safely to harbour.
And so what
So
happened?
the only thing to do
Uh-huh.
was to dangerously have the aircraft carriers who carried a lot of fuel
Yes.
approach the shore and meet the destroyers, and hopefully in open air, in the middle of the day, give them fuel before they ran out of fuel.
Very risky.
Very risky because we were within range. So the day after, the 36 hours after the Japanese cruiser was sunk, we had our ships, our aircraft carriers, including ours, each with a destroyer alongside and a fuel pipe feeding them fuel, right? Which meant that you had to reduce speed, keep in a straight line. You could not zigzag because obviously with 2 ships close to each other, the last thing you wanted is for one ship to hit the other.
Terribly vulnerable to Japanese attack.
So that made us a much easier target. So all day long, we were being attacked by land-based Japanese aircraft. And this is where my job came in, together with two or three others, to direct our planes and try to stop the land-based planes approaching the fleet.
And you were successful.
And the only disadvantage, which the Japanese must have realized, was that as nighttime approached and the sun went down, we could not land at night, nor could we take off at night in those days from those small aircraft carriers. So the danger was as night approached, okay? And so all of a sudden, I only realized this later, only reason I realized this later, the last 4 planes protecting us, who would have to land within the next half hour, were planes under my command, or my direction, aged 21.
How many men under you?
What?
How many men's lives at stake in this?
Well, on the destroyers, I suppose 1,000, just under 200 crew in each. Five destroyers. Apart from which, the Japanese wanted to sink aircraft carriers. We were aircraft carriers that were built, jerry-built, no armor protection on the
deck.
On the flight deck, no armor protection on the side, any torpedo, anything. And in fact, if you read the Battle of Midway, this is what was the disadvantage of many of the Japanese aircraft carriers.
That's right.
No protection, because you had one bomb through the middle of the aircraft would cause absolute havoc, because it would explode down below, and there you had aircraft full of aviation fuel, bombs to attack the enemy, torpedoes to attack the enemy. In fact, inevitably, the ships would eventually blow up.
Louis, let's finish that story. What happened then with those last planes that were out in the dark?
So, fortunately, those last four planes of my command, I was successful in intercepting 4 enemy planes coming about 50 miles away from the fleet.
And these are Zeros honing in.
These were, I don't know what they were. I'm sorry, I do not know what they were.
Okay.
I suspect they were, because they could carry bombs.
Oh, they were Betty bombers, or yeah.
And and of course, when you intercepted them, you didn't intercept them that way, because you approaching each other at 300 miles an hour. That's approaching each other at a combined speed of 600 miles an hour.
That's right.
So it is much better to know where the sun was, know where the clouds were, and attack them on the side. So you had to veer away from the incoming planes and try to turn them in.
And flank
your
them.
planes.
Flank them.
And fortuitously, I was successful, and the 4 Japanese planes were attacked. They turned tail. Smoke and flames were coming out of them, and our pilots wanted to follow them and see a kill, because unless you saw the plane hit the water, it was not a kill, or blow up, it was not a kill. And I had to bring them back because our planes were running out of fuel. So our pilots were not very pleased with me when I brought them back, but at least they came back with enough fuel to land safely.
Did they buy you a pint or anything?
No. That was not the end of the day, because one lone, as darkness to one lone Japanese plane from the land, I don't think it had anything to do with these 4, because this was about half an hour later when things were really dark. One Japanese plane, we could not send up our planes to intercept because it was already too dark.
Yes.
And I came out on deck and saw this plane attack us, and I saw the bomb dropping.
Good Lord.
The bomb dropping, aimed at us. It did not hit us. It landed alongside the destroyer, taking fuel from us, and exploded alongside the destroyer. did not destroy the destroyer, but did kill 20-odd sailors on board the destroyer.
Oh, just from the concussion, from the blast?
Yeah. So, in the end, the only Allied casualties were those people on the destroyer. On the Japanese side, virtually the whole crew of the Haruno. That was my main action, and for that one thing, months of training to how to direct planes against incoming enemy planes was valuable, because if those planes had got through the protection, goodness knows you'd have had 4 planes attacking the carriers. Inevitably, one of them would have succeeded.
Were you recognized afterwards for this, or was this just basically...
Between you and me, we were a bit perturbed. I shouldn't have been the only one recognized, but maybe. By the way, during this thing, my boss, head man, was looking over my shoulder. If he didn't like what I was doing, he would have taken over, directing the planes. But the only one who got mentioned with a DSO, which is next to a VC, was the captain of our ship.
Distinguished service?
And his name was Dauntless, and he became a rear admiral later, and continued to have a successful naval career. We were a bit annoyed that he was the only one who got a formal recognition for a battle successfully.
Did you ever get any leave between your actions in the ETO and in the PTO?
Yes, I once got leave, but it was leave with a job. The main problem was in those days was the heat of the tropics, which could not be offset because none of the ships carried air conditioning. All they carried is forced air. So you would force air.
Right.
Hot air was. And so there was a serious problem suffered by probably 10 or 15% of the crew, which was bad heat rash. And at one time, when it was decided that we probably wouldn't see action, the worst cases, about 40 of them, was sent ashore to a beach to recover in cool air, and I was sent as the commanding officer of those.
So that was your time off, as it were.
So it was sort of time off for me, but I was responsible for making sure that none of them got drowned on this beach.
And you had no casualties, thank goodness.
No.
And let's talk a little bit about the planes. They were sea fires, you say.
They were sea fires. There was the fleet air arm or naval version of the famous Spitfire.
Same ground speed?
Same ground speed.
Same elliptical?
Same everything.
Wing?
Slightly heavier perhaps, because they had to have special equipment 1/3 of the way along the wings so the wings could fold upwards.
Now, were they elliptical or were they cut off like you had the ground support Spitfires in the Royal Air Force? Were the Navy Air, did they have the elliptical or pointy wing, or was it?
No, exactly the same.
Exactly the same.
Exactly the same.
That's great.
Aerodynamically, in the air, you couldn't have told the difference.
And it did very well. What's the kill ratio
It
against?
did extremely well. Its only problem compared to the American equivalent of, which are called Wildcats and Hellcats, is that it had a relatively weak undercarriage, which didn't matter if you had a long airfield, but did matter when you had to come down on this very, very small landing field in the middle of the ocean.
Not to mention that that landing field is yawing up and down as well. Yeah, bouncing up and down.
If there's a swell, absolutely.
Any funny incidents you'd like to share with us?
Sorry?
Any funny anecdotes or incidents of your service that you'd like to share? You mentioned you may be worried about political correctness.
Oh, political correctness, yes, I got some funny anecdotes. at one time, when we knew that our ship had to have some repairs in Trincomalee, we sent all the planes across Ceylon to the landing field in Colombo. And although I was part as what the American Navy would call a deck officer,
Yes.
which was an officer that could take watch on the bridge, the equivalent of a U.S. Navy deck officer in the British Navy was an executive branch officer.
I see.
But they were the only ones who could command a ship and become the admiral of the fleet. I managed to. This was the Argentine smartness in me. I managed to say it was terribly important for me to continue to have close relationships with the. I'm coming to answer your question about anecdotes. To be close to and fly with, in two-seater planes, fly with the pilots that I would have to guide.
Oh,
So
neat.
that when they were up in the air with nothing but sky and sea around them, the voice coming to them, they knew who this guy was that was telling them to do this, that, or the other.
Oh, very good. Very good.
So I went across, and of course I didn't do anything, and I found out that there were something like 40 or 50 Wrens. Wrens was
Yes.
stood for Women's Navy.
Yep.
Women's Navy.
Reds.
And when they found that there were these pilots and this other guy there, we went to a dance at the big hotel in Colombo.
Did you
And
plan?
I went for an attractive girl who happened to be daughter, this is important, daughter of the chief of police of Nairobi, Kenya. Or what they would say in those days was Nairobi, Kenya. Right. So I asked her out to lunch the next day. And she said yes, and I said, where can we go that's different? And have a nice time and have a nice lunch. And she said, well, there's a lovely hotel, 25 miles south of Colombo, and I'm told it has a very nice beach. Can you afford to get a taxi to go there? And I said, yes. So we went in time for lunch, right? Not only in time for lunch, in time to have a swim before lunch.
Oh, very nice.
So we arrived at the hotel, and she went to the ladies' room, and I went to the men's room to change, and then we went out on the beach. It was a beautiful day, lovely beach, lovely sea.
Anything like from here to eternity?
Not rough. And we sat down on the beach, and I said, let's get in the sea. She said, you get in the sea, I'm not getting in the sea. And I said, why? It's nice. She said, no, I'm not getting in the sea. I said, so I got in the sea, and when I came out again, I said, why didn't you get in the sea? She said, well, it's difficult to tell. Look over there, 80 yards away. And I looked down and see there were other people on the beach. One of them happened to be a dark-skinned Ceylonese man who was wearing a loincloth and went in and out of the sea. She refused to get in the same sea as a dark-skinned local.
Good Lord in heaven.
I could not. That was my first view of extreme racism.
My God.
And she was the daughter of the chief of police of Nairobi, Kenya.
How did you handle it? It must have put a damper on the day.
What? Pretty girl, do you think I was going to put a damper on the day?
That's a wonderful story. Thank you for sharing that. It says so much about your humanity and your sense of what we were fighting for,
Yeah.
right? Who was your commander on the HMS Hunter?
Captain Torres. Torlesse.
Was he fair? Was he a
He
good
was
captain?
fair, but not very warm.
Oh.
But he he happened to be the senior captain of the 5 or 6 aircraft carriers the same size. Senior captain meaning had the rank of captain, which is equivalent to the rank of colonel in the army.
Mm-hmm.
Rank of captain in the army
Is
in
it?
the navy is equivalent to colonel in the army.
One would think general, but clearly mistaken.
Just short of brigadier or brigadier general.
I see.
The next step up, and he became he continued and he became a rear admiral. In fact, his further claim to fame was in charge of the first atom bombs that the British dropped after
the Americans.
The Americans dropped the atom bombs over Tokyo.
Well, the French threw.
This is after the war. After
Yes.
the war.
Yes, indeed. The French did their atomic tests in the Bikini or Tahitian area.
Where
did the British?
Were dropped in some remote islands in the South Pacific. I don't know.
The British did the same?
Yeah.
Yeah. How did you cope with fear? Did you ever find yourself feared, on board ship through storm or meeting the enemy?
I felt no differently on board ship as I did in the middle of a German air attack on London. I never went on when I was on leave on London. There were air attacks constantly. I never went to an airline shelter. You became a fatalist. You believed in fatalism.
Talk a little bit about that.
In other words, you believed, you were young and adventurous. If there's a bomb up there that has my number on it, there's nothing I can do. It's going to get me.
So you were in
I
London.
just hope my number is not on any one bomb.
Good Lord.
So I never ever went to an aircraft
Shelter.
a bomb shelter, except when I was in naval barracks. There you had to. You were forced to.
So you were in London during the Doodlebug attacks?
During the doodle bomb attacks, correct. Just for a very short while, then I was off. I can't remember. Then I was off for my first duty on HMS Hunter and an invasion of the south of France.
Louis, it speaks volumes to your courage.
No, it doesn't.
Doesn't it?
Adventure. The calling was adventure. I never thought of myself as a particular hero. I'd lost a brother. I'd lost a brother in the Royal Canadian Air Force before I even volunteered to join up.
This is in the height of the Malta campaign.
Right. Correct.
Yes.
That was in 1941.
That's right.
He was killed a few weeks before Pearl Harbor, actually. Many Americans joined the Canadian Air Force before Pearl Harbor
Yes.
as volunteers.
A number of Cubans did also, actually.
Did they?
Yeah. Famously one Mike Enciso. But
That name is familiar.
yes, well, he was awarded the medal by King George VI and was recognized for he helped.
So this question of how brave you were a hero. It wasn't heroism. You just say, if I'm going to die, I'm going to die.
Did you meet any other? Of course, your family. We've discussed this before. Your family. You were born in Argentina, but did you meet any other Latin Americans when you were in service? In the Royal Navy?
Absolutely.
Yes.
I would think there was. Well, they were. I found out later. I didn't know at the time. I didn't know many. There were a total of 5,500
Really?
Argentines, mainly of first and second generation English,
Right.
British, and a few, in my case, well, my mother was Scottish, my father was American, and only a handful of those who were the British community, second, third generation in Argentina, because of the railways and opening up the first estancias,
That's right.
was something like 120,000 in Argentina. at a time when the total population of Argentina was about 20 million.
Good Lord.
The Americans were, just to have, anyhow, 5,500 of whom 90% have British passports as well as Argentine passports.
Did you meet any Argentinos?
Oh, a lot.
How did it feel to meet an Argentino?
In fact, in London, the Anglo community in Argentina raised money to fund what was called the South America Volunteer House, which could put up in a sort of bread and breakfast style fashion up to 120 Argentinos on leave at any one time. So I met, on leave, I would go there.
Did you speak Spanish to them when you saw them, when you came across? Wasn't it being on board ship, of course, there was no one to speak Spanish to, but when you met these...
Talking about, I'll go back to Spanish on board ship later. I can't remember, I think we spoke English mainly, but we would occasionally speak Spanish just to keep it up.
Just to practice it.
Concerning Spanish on board ship, you asked earlier, what do we do on board ship during weeks and weeks of no action against the enemy?
Yes.
We would make a point of having officers who had delved into certain other professions giving talks to the troops, to the sea.
Oh my God, that's wonderful, the university.
It's like a sort of university.
Wonderful.
And I was named as the teacher of Spanish, in case anybody wanted Spanish. So I had a group of about 25 sailors who wanted to learn Spanish.
¿Y hablaron español?
No, I'm sorry, as an Argentine, I called it Castellano.
Castellano.
No Castellano. Castellano.
Did you keep up with any of your ex-students? Did they go on to become proficient in Spanish?
I have no idea. Sorry, I don't know, because the war ended, the ship disembarked in November late 1945. The war ended against Japan in September 45, and because our captain was the senior captain of aircraft carriers, our ship was one of the first to go back to. I have an anecdote there.
Please.
If you like an anecdote.
Please.
So our ship was the first one to come back from the Far East into Belfast, which was capital of Northern Ireland.
Which still is.
And we decided that since we were the first ship, it would be nice to do something special. So as we were coming through Egypt or somewhere like that, we filled our chilled food storage areas with a whole pile of bananas. And we advertised as we approached Belfast that we'd give a party to the children of Belfast, that we could take 300 children or 400 children, first come, first served, and feed them tropical foods, which included bananas. That didn't work very well, because it so happened none of them had ever had a banana, and 50% of them fell ill because bananas were too rich for their stomachs. So that's one story. Anyhow, the mayor of Belfast wanted to thank us because we did other things to show that our ship was coming back, and we wanted to show that we were grateful to the taxpayer who paid for us, and so on and so forth. So he said he was going to throw a party for the officers. And he was going to do it on a night in the mayoral big meeting halls.
Yes.
So about 70 or 80 officers were designated. We were 120 officers because we had a lot of pilots, of course. So I was one of 70 or 80. We turned up in buses at the mayoral house and walked, not the house, palace, I guess, and walked in to this great big hall, and I would imagine the hall that was probably 120 feet by 120 feet, a big hall, big lit, and so all around the edges of the hall were a whole bunch of seats occupied by pretty girls who were going to be our dancing partners. Okay? Now we were told by our senior officers there are going to be many more girls than you officers. All right? So none of you guys you're not allowed to dance more than 2 dances in succession with the same girl. You've got to change. Because you've got to, all the girls have to have at least one dance.
You got to spread the resource.
So, not unnaturally, I chose one of the prettier girls, danced with her twice, saw her in a seat, danced with somebody else, and then 2 or 3 times later, I danced with her again. Took her back to a seat, and I did this 5 or 6 times, and eventually I said, what I was looking for was being able to take her home and have a good night kiss. You didn't, in those days, you didn't expect any more than that.
Right.
Okay. So I said, by the way, where do you live? She named a part of Belfast, I didn't know. I said, is that far away? How do you get there? She said, and I normally take a bus. I said, do the buses come at night? Yes. After 10 o'clock at night, they run every hour or so on. I said, well, if I haven't been able to spend my money, I'd love to get a taxi. Now I'll get a taxi and take you home. Would that be nice? Oh, that would be lovely. I said, okay, when the dance finishes, we'll meet downstairs. So there I was, oh my goodness me. So I went and arranged for a taxi to be ready to pick us up.
Yes, weren't you referred to as the Latino lover, the Latin lover?
Well, that was already in the Far East.
But go on.
As a Latin lover and a South American Joe. Anyhow, so I go downstairs waiting for my girlfriend, and guess what? 2 identical twin girls. I'd been dancing with identical twin girls. So there I was, I had to take them both, I didn't get a kiss from either woman. Talk about frustration and wasted money.
Well, your cup runneth over. I'm going to say it first in Spanish and then in English. Luis Pryor, muchísimas gracias como padre y como ciudadano de una sociedad libre por sancionar nuestro futuro contra el fascismo y después contra el comunismo. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you, Mr. Louis Pryor. I speak as a family man, as a father to a child, and as a member of a free society. I'd like to thank you wholeheartedly for what you did in order to make sure that our way of life continued.
Can I talk to her?
Please.
Okay. I've said this first in English and then in Spanish. And I repeated this, by the way, recently when the Argentine Congress decided to celebrate. They had not realized that 5,000.
We have to stop. I think. It's the battery's dying.
Okay.
So I think I'm going to end it there.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Do you have anything else to say?
Yes, very short. People thought we were heroes. In my opinion, our parents were heroes. I never heard of any of our parents trying to stop us to volunteer and fight the war. The war was considered a justified war, and our parents supported their sons volunteering to go and fight it.
Louis, speaking as a parent, this goes straight to my heart. You're absolutely selfless in that attitude. And speaking as a parent, that goes straight to my heart.
Well, to me, they were the heroes, if you think about it. Rather than we were adventurers.